On May 16, 1801, a man who would change the history of America was born. William Henry Seward was born into a successful family that owned many slaves. As a child, Seward's parents allowed him to play with the slave children. As he grew older, he began realizing the different social status his friends had, and wondered why things were that way. Eventually, the realization led to Seward's anti-slavery views. When Henry was 15, he was accepted into Union College, where he graduated at the top of his class. After this, he went on continuing his study of law with John Anton. Seward then passed his bar examination, which is a test meant to determine if one is fit to practice law, and then settled in Auburn, New York. There he became Judge Elijah Miller's junior partner. When he was 23, Seward got married to Judge Miller's daughter, Frances, who at the time was 20 years old. William and Frances had 5 children together: Frederick Seward, Frances Adeline Seward, Augustus Henry Seward, William Henry Seward Jr., and Cornelia Seward. Later on, they also adopted Olive Risley Seward.
Seward and his wife were known for being fair and moral people. Evidence shows that Seward and his wife Frances were greatly involved in the Underground Railroad, where they helped slaves escape to freedom. They also financially supported Frederick Douglass and the creation of the newspaper, North Star, where Douglass denounced slavery and fought for the emancipation of women and other oppressed groups. The Sewards also helped Harriet Tubman with the purchase of her home in Henry's hometown of Auburn, New York.
In 1830, at the age of 29, William Seward was elected to the New York State Senate. There he met Thurlow Weed, an ex-Whig Party Republican journalist who shaped public opinion about different topics through his newspaper and other writings. William Seward was helped greatly by Thurlow to launch his political career. In 1838, at the age of 37, Seward was elected as governor of New York and assumed office on January 1st, 1839. At the end of his term, in 1840, he was re-elected and served 2 more years. During his tenure, Seward showed progressive policies on expanding public education and immigration. As the governor of New York State, Seward made sure that fugitive slaves were guaranteed a trial by jury, which ended up being passed by the New York State Legislature. In 1846, he defended a free black man named William Freeman, who had murdered 4 members of the Van Ness family. Seward decided to take the case because he believed that Freeman was insane, and he knew that Freeman wouldn't receive a fair trial due to his race and color. During the trial, Seward had made several statements that supported the abolishment movement. Although Seward wasn't able to prove Freeman innocent, he still supported various civil movements like the abolition movement and mental health reform through his defense of Freeman. In 1850, Seward made his higher law speech, where he talked about how there was a higher law than the Constitution. Due to his compelling argument, California entered the states as a free state. Seward publicly supported the abolition movement, but risked his career behind the door of his home, where he would harbor fugitive slaves in his Auburn house. Seward and his wife also allowed their home to be used as a stop on the Underground Railroad. Seward would write notes about how well the Underground Railroad was going. In 1858, Seward made yet another public speech about slavery, which later became known as Seward's irrepressible conflict speech. Seward states that he believes that the slave system is intolerable, unjust, and inhumane, and that having slave and free states would soon cause a fight between the states, and the nation would either be slaveholding or free. When Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, it was no surprise that Seward had signed it.
It was the year 1849, and William Henry Seward ran and won for the election of New York Senator. There were many problems that revolved around slavery and sectional problems. Slavery was argued because slave states and free states felt that their representation in Congress was unfair. Seward brought up the morality of slavery, unlike many others at the time. Southern states threatened to secede, and the Union began to fall apart. These problems were the majority of the discussion in the Senate, which later resulted in the Compromise of 1850. He was one of the foremost critics of the Compromise of 1850, a group of measures that tightened the fugitive slave law and maintained the slave trade in the South. The Compromise of 1850 admitted California in as a free state while strengthening the Fugitive Slave Act, which further aggravated the tension between pro- and anti-slavery factions. Seward was strongly opposed of the compromise because he believed it would compel Northern citizens to return escaped slaves or face imprisonment. As this argument was happening, Seward's wife, Frances, had established a stop in their Auburn home for the Underground Railroad. At the stop, many runaway slaves, including Harriet Tubman, received money and assistance from the Seward family so they can continue their journey to freedom. William Henry Seward was re-elected to the Senate in 1855. He later joined the Republican Party after the dissolution of the Whigs and entered the presidential primary.
In the election of 1860, Seward decided to run for primary to become president in office as a Republican. As the favorite to win, Seward took an extended trip overseas in order to avoid possibility of unnecessary blunder before the general election. Instead, he came back and found out that Abraham Lincoln was making enormous gains. He ran against Abraham Lincoln and had lost the primary. He went on the stump for Lincoln and eventually played a critical role in securing Illinois' Republicans' victory. Seward's support earned him the cabinet post of Secretary of State in Lincoln's fleeting administration and position of unique friendship with the struggling president. Seward began to gain respect for Lincoln, and slowly they became close co-workers in the cabinet during the Civil War. Lincoln and Seward went on to sign the Emancipation Proclamation together. The Emancipation Proclamation, which was their attempt to try and suggest the emancipation of slavery. Not many Northerners wanted to abolish slavery completely, they just wanted to stop its expansion, including Lincoln. In April of 1865, Seward was in a stagecoach accident days before the assassination of Lincoln. Seward survived and Frances was not present in the accident. Although Frances was not at the accident, she died in June of 1865 caused by a heart attack. The Republican nomination of 1860 was one of the great political contests of America's history, where it was Abraham Lincoln against Salmon Chase against William Seward. Seward was Lincoln's fiercest and most critical opponent, who later became his most loyal and trusted advisor. After Seward's loss, he goes silent for around 8 weeks before he decides to get out on the campaign trail and stump for Lincoln. Lincoln ends up offering Seward in early December the position of Secretary of State. He offers the job by writing a formal letter and an informal letter. Seward begins to gain respect to Lincoln as a leader, and soon they both became close friends. The cabinet would be ready and gathered for a meeting, and the President and Secretary of State would enter sharing a joke. The cabinet knew that whatever was to be discussed in that meeting was already talked through and decided by Seward and Lincoln. Lincoln would wander to Seward's house, whether it was to talk about some issue or share a story, but it seemed as if Lincoln enjoyed the evening time company of Seward. Lincoln's assassins had also attempted to murder Seward. They made their way past the servants and clubbed Seward's son Frederick and burst into Seward's room. Seward had been in a severe carriage accident, so he was stuck in his bed, which was why the assassins decided to take advantage of the opportunity. The pistol ended up not working, so they used the knife to slash Seward on the face and neck, but never hitting an artery. Seward was very upset about the death of his friend Lincoln. As time passed, Seward realized that Lincoln's death had secured his place in history, and that Lincoln will overshadow him. If his own legacy may have been sealed by this, he would have never accomplished the one thing that almost every American knows him by, mainly to purchase Alaska for the U.S.
Seward continued to serve as Secretary of State under President Andrew Johnson. The next year, he was instrumental in sustaining President Johnson throughout his impeachment. In 1867, Seward negotiated the purchase of Alaska with the Russians for $7.2 million, which was about 2 cents per acre. He was mocked for the purchase since Alaska was vast and frozen. Everyone called it Seward's icebox and had no hope in what Seward was doing or thinking. But Seward believed it was one of his greatest achievements, even though it would take the people a generation to find out. After his time in office under Johnson, Seward retired. He couldn't find peace at home and decided to embark on a trip around the world from 1870 to 1871. Seward was in his Auburn home when he began to have breathing problems. This was after the stagecoach accident. William Henry Seward died at the age of 71 in the year of 1872. His last words to his children was, "Love one another." He did many things during his life. He was a lawyer, he was a senator of New York, and then he was reelected. He helped with the abolishment of slavery and lastly bought Alaska for the United States. Seward believed that his greatest accomplishment was the purchase of Alaska.